The cold sweat trickled down Alara's spine as she cautiously navigated the skeletal remains of what had once been a thriving metropolis. The buildings, now strangled by bioluminescent vines, cast eerie shadows that danced across the cracked pavement beneath her worn boots. She paused, adjusting the respirator that covered the lower half of her face, her eyes scanning the horizon for any movement. 6 months since she'd last seen another human being. 6 months of solitude, scavenging, and survival. The green spread had changed everything. What began as a revolutionary genetically modified plant meant to combat climate change had mutated, evolved, and ultimately consumed nearly everything in its path. Beautiful and deadly, the perfect predator. The vines glowed with an otherworldly blue-green light, illuminating the darkness and transforming the urban jungle into something from a fevered nightmare. Alara checked her map again, a tattered piece of paper protected by a makeshift laminate of scavenged plastic. The old medical research facility should be just ahead, past what remained of the central plaza. If the intelligence she'd gathered was correct, she might find a nanocell stabilizer there. The only hope for saving Mira, the youngest and most vulnerable member of her hidden community. The child's cellular degeneration had accelerated in the past week, and without intervention, she wouldn't survive another month. Time was running out. Every minute spent in the open increased Alara's chances of becoming another victim of the green spread. Yet she pressed forward, driven by desperation and the faces of the 12 survivors who depended on her success. They had already lost so many. The medical building loomed ahead, its lower floors completely engulfed by pulsating vines that seemed to breathe in perfect rhythm. Alara took a deep breath, tightened the straps on her backpack, and approached the structure with practiced stealth. Years as a former urban explorer had given her an edge in this new, hostile world. Knowing how to move silently, find unconventional entry points, and assess structural integrity with a glance. She located a third-floor window with fewer vines, climbing carefully up using the mutated flora as handholds when necessary, tensing at each touch, knowing that some species reacted to body heat or pressure. These particular specimens seemed dormant, however, and she reached the window ledge without incident. Once inside, Alara pulled out her hand-drawn schematic of the building. The research labs would be on the 5th floor, according to the building directory she'd found in another facility last month. The central stairwell appeared relatively clear, with only thin vines threading through the concrete steps. She moved cautiously, testing each step before committing her full weight. The laboratory corridor was darker than she expected, the bioluminescence outside not reaching this far into the building's interior. Alara clicked on her small flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness to reveal ransacked rooms, broken equipment, and more ominously, scattered bones. Human remains picked clean of flesh. Her heart pounded in her chest as she systematically searched each room, painfully aware that the stabilizer could be anywhere or nowhere at all. The 4th lab yielded nothing useful, as she closed the door with a growing sense of dread. Only 2 more labs remained on this floor. The 5th lab's door was sealed shut, unlike the others. A good sign, perhaps it had remained untouched since the initial outbreak. Alara leveraged her small pry bar between the door and frame, applying steady pressure until the lock mechanism gave way with a metallic groan that seemed deafening in the silence. She froze, listening for any reaction to the noise, then slowly pushed the door open. Her flashlight beam swept across intact workstations, relatively undisturbed equipment, and a sealed containment unit in the center of the room. Alara's breath caught in her throat. There it was, the distinct blue glow of a nanotech refrigeration unit, still operational on emergency power. Moving quickly now, she approached the unit and examined its contents through the clear front panel. Inside, carefully arranged in labeled slots, were several small devices that matched the description she was looking for. Nanocell stabilizers, designed to halt cellular breakdown in patients suffering from radiation, poisoning, or extreme genetic damage. Exactly what Mira needed. Relief flooded through her body as she entered the override code she discovered in the facility records last month. The unit's lock disengaged with a soft click, and Alara reached inside to retrieve one of the stabilizers. Just as her fingers closed around the small device, a sound behind her, a soft rustling unlike anything she'd heard before, made her blood run cold. She turned slowly, flashlight beam tracking the movement, and her throat tightened in horror. From beneath a desk in the corner, a new type of vine was emerging, thinner than most varieties she'd encountered, with an almost translucent quality that revealed pulsing fluids within. It moved with deliberate purpose, not the random reaching of most mutated flora. Alara backed away, stabilizer clutched tightly in her hand, but the movement only seemed to agitate the vine. It suddenly whipped forward with impossible speed, wrapping around her ankle before she could react. She slashed at it with her knife, but more vines erupted from hidden crevices, coiling around her legs and waist with crushing force. "No," she gasped, struggling violently as the vines tightened their grip. The more she fought, the tighter they constricted, like living pythons responding to their prey's resistance. One vine wrapped around her wrist, forcing her to drop the stabilizer, which clattered to the floor just beyond reach. Alara felt a wave of dizziness as tiny spores erupted from the vine's surface, releasing a sweet-smelling pollen that made her thoughts immediately fuzzy. A neurotoxin, she realized with clinical detachment, even as panic surged through her veins. She managed to pull her respirator back up, but it was too late. She'd already inhaled enough to feel its effects. The vines continued their methodical encasement of her body, pinning her arms to her sides, restricting her chest so that each breath became labored. Her knees buckled, but she didn't fall. The vines held her upright, suspended in their unyielding embrace. With her remaining strength, Alara screamed, a raw, desperate sound that tore from her throat and echoed through the empty corridors of the abandoned building. She screamed again, knowing it was futile, knowing no one could possibly hear her in this dead city where only plants lived and thrived. But it was all she had left, a final defiance against the inevitable. Her voice faded as the toxin took stronger hold, her eyelids growing heavy, her muscles relaxing involuntarily. The stabilizer lay on the floor, just centimeters from her dangling fingertips, its promise of salvation now a cruel reminder of her failure. Mira would die. The community would wonder what had happened to her. Eventually, they might send someone else to search, only to meet the same fate. As consciousness began to slip away, Alara thought she heard footsteps, a sound so foreign in this world of rustling leaves and creaking vines that her mind dismissed it as hallucination. But then a shadow fell across her face, and through blurring vision, she made out the silhouette of a human figure in the doorway. Kale paused at the laboratory threshold, his weathered face tightening at the sight before him. He'd been conducting his routine patrol of the sector, a habit born of military discipline and the paranoid vigilance required for survival, when an unmistakably human cry had pierced the eerie silence of the dead city. The sound had stopped him cold. He hadn't encountered another person in nearly 8 months. Instinct told him to walk away. In this world, other humans often meant competition for scarce resources, potential theft, or worse. Most survivors had learned that solitude, while punishing, was usually safer than company. Yet something in that desperate cry had reached past his caution and touched a part of him he thought long dead. He studied the scene methodically, assessing the threat. The woman was nearly completely enveloped in a variety of vine he hadn't encountered before, translucent, active, clearly intelligent in its predatory behavior. Her breathing was shallow, eyes half closed, consciousness clearly fading. The spores floating in the air explained her state, a new evolutionary adaptation, perhaps designed to subdue prey more efficiently. Kale pulled his specialized filtration mask tighter and considered his options. The smart move would be to leave. The woman was as good as dead, and attempting rescue would expose him to unnecessary risk. He started to back away, then stopped when his light caught the glint of something on the floor near her dangling hand, a piece of technology he recognized immediately. A nanocell stabilizer, identical to the one he'd been searching for during the past 3 months. The piece that might finally allow him to complete the long-range communications array he'd been assembling, piece by precious piece. His only hope of contacting other survivor enclaves that might still exist beyond the Greenspread's reach. Decision made, Cale moved quickly. From his pack, he withdrew a small spray bottle containing a weak chemical solution he discovered could temporarily stun the more responsive vine species. He liberally coated the vines surrounding the woman, watching as their movements slowed, their grip loosening incrementally. With precise cuts from his specially treated blade, reinforced with a compound that inhibited plant growth, he began severing the vines. Systematically, working from her head downward, the plant responded sluggishly, attempting to re-establish its grip but hampered by the chemical spray. When he'd cut enough vines to free her upper body, Cale caught her weight as she slumped forward. Her breathing was ragged, pupils dilated from the spore's effect. He quickly administered a counteragent he carried for emergencies, a simple stimulant that helped combat the sedative effects of most plant toxins. Not a cure, but enough to keep her functional until her body could process the toxin naturally. "Can you hear me?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. When she didn't respond immediately, he gave her shoulder a firm shake. "Stay conscious. Focus on my voice." Alara's vision swam, the stranger's face blurring and refocusing as she fought against the vine's toxin. Her first coherent thought was of the stabilizer, and she weakly pointed toward the floor where it had fallen. "My pack," she managed to whisper. "Need to secure it." Cale glanced at the device, then at her pack, understanding immediately. He retrieved both, tucking the stabilizer safely into an inner pocket of her backpack before slinging it over his shoulder alongside his own. "We need to move," he said flatly. "Those vines will recover soon, and they might have some way of signaling others of their kind." Supporting her weight, he guided her toward the door. Alara struggled to coordinate her movements, her legs refusing to fully cooperate. Each step was an exercise in concentration, but the stranger's grip was firm, preventing her from falling. "Who are you?" she asked, the words slurring slightly. "Later," he replied tersely. "Focus on walking." The journey back through the building felt interminable. Twice they had to stop as Alara retched, her body's attempt to purge the toxin. Cale waited impassively each time, neither offering comfort nor showing impatience. When they finally reached the street level, he directed them not toward the plaza she had crossed earlier, but toward a narrow alley that seemed more densely overgrown. Counterintuitive, he explained briefly, noting her questioning look. "The thicker growth here is older, less active. Ambient radiation from the reactor meltdown in this sector stunted their development." Ça fait passage. They moved slowly through the twisted urban landscape, Alara gradually regaining more control over her limbs as the counteragent worked through her system. Cale maintained a vigilant watch, occasionally stopping to listen or observe something only he could detect. After nearly an hour of careful navigation, they approached what had once been a subway entrance, now partially concealed by a controlled arrangement of debris. "Home," Cale stated simply, moving aside a carefully balanced sheet of metal that served as a disguised door. The stairwell beyond was clear of vegetation, treated with some kind of plant repellent that Alara could smell but not identify. Cale helped her descend to a reinforced security door that he unlocked with a complex sequence of movements. The space beyond was unexpected, a former subway maintenance room converted into a surprisingly functional living space. Solar-powered LED strips provided clean, energy-efficient lighting. A makeshift bed occupied one corner, while tables constructed from salvage materials held organized equipment, tools, and supplies. A small water filtration system dripped steadily into a collection container, and a ventilation system hummed quietly, cycling fresh air from some unseen intake. "Sit," Cale directed, pointing to a sturdy chair near what appeared to be a medical station. As Alara complied, legs still shaky, he busied himself preparing something at a small heating element. "Drink this," he said moments later, handing her a cup containing a bitter-smelling liquid. It will help neutralize the remaining toxin. Alara hesitated, studying the stranger properly for the first time. He was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his mid-40s, with a face weathered by exposure and stress. His dark hair was streaked with gray and cut practically short. His movements were efficient, economical, suggesting military training or similar discipline. Nothing about him invited trust, yet he had saved her life when leaving her would have been easier. She accepted the cup and drank, grimacing at the taste. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished, "for saving me back there." Kale acknowledged her gratitude with a curt nod, then fixed her with an evaluating stare. "What were you doing in that lab?" Alara weighed her response carefully. Survival in this new world meant protecting information almost as carefully as supplies. Revealing the existence of her community could put them all at risk. Yet this man had saved her life at considerable personal risk. "I needed the stabilizer," she said finally. "Someone in my care is sick. Cellular degeneration from exposure to a specific strain of the green spread. The stabilizer is their only chance." "You're not alone," Kale observed, his tone neutral but his eyes narrowing slightly. "No," Alara admitted, deciding that partial honesty was her best strategy. "There are others who depend on me. That's all I can say." Kale didn't press further, instead moving to a cluttered workbench where various technological components were arranged in neat sections. Alara noticed sophisticated tools and what appeared to be communications equipment in various stages of assembly. "You're building something," she stated, following his gaze. "Long-range communications array," he responded after a brief hesitation. "Trying to contact any organized resistance or government remnants that might exist outside the spread zones. Been gathering components for almost 2 years. And you need a stabilizer too," Alara realized, remembering how he'd recognized the device immediately. "The quantum processor core degrades rapidly without one. Previous attempts failed after a few minutes of operation." He turned to face her directly. "Your stabilizer would complete my work." The implication hung in the air between them. Her stabilizer, Myra's lifeline, was also the final piece he needed. 2 vital missions, 1 crucial component. "I can't," she said finally, her voice firm despite her weakened state. "I'm sorry for your project, but this child will die without it." To her surprise, Kale simply nodded. "I know. Just wanted to be clear about where we stand." A tense silence fell between them. Alara felt strength returning to her limbs as the antidote worked through her system. She glanced toward her pack, reassuring herself that the stabilizer was still there, then back at the impressive shelter this solitary survivor had created. "How long have you been down here?" she asked, partly from genuine curiosity, partly to fill the uncomfortable silence. 14 months in this location," he replied, moving to check the water filtration system. "Relocated 3 times before finding this place. The concrete shielding blocks most plant signals, and the depth provides thermal isolation." "It's impressive," Alara admitted. "Better than anywhere I've stayed since." Since everything changed, something flickered across Kale's face, perhaps pride, quickly suppressed. "It's functional," he said dismissively. "You can rest here tonight. You're still processing the toxin, and night travel is suicide now that the luminescent strains have fully established their detection networks." Alara wanted to refuse, to insist on returning immediately to her community with the precious stabilizer, but she knew he was right. Her body still felt heavy, her reactions dulled. Attempting to navigate the deadly urban landscape in her condition would be foolish at best, fatal at worst. Myra's condition was serious but not yet critical. One night wouldn't make the difference between life and death. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll leave at first light." Kale grunted acknowledgement, then returned to his workbench, effectively dismissing her. Alara leaned back in the chair, watching him work with methodical precision on circuit boards and components she only vaguely recognized. Despite his gruff manner, there was something compelling about his self-sufficient competence, his organized approach to survival in a world gone mad. As the hours passed, they exchanged minimal conversation, practical matters only. Kale shared food from his stores, simple but nutritionally balanced. He showed her the bathroom facilities, impressively rigged with collected rainwater for basic sanitation. When night theoretically fell in the world above, he indicated she could use the narrow cot while he took first watch. "You still don't fully trust me," she observed as she settled onto the surprisingly comfortable bed. Kale looked up from cleaning his weapons, his expression unreadable. "I don't trust anyone," he said finally. "Neither should you." With that stark reminder of their reality, Alara closed her eyes, one hand still protectively near her pack containing the precious stabilizer. Despite her intention to remain vigilant, exhaustion from the day's trauma soon pulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. She awoke to the sound of movement, instantly alert. Kale was checking his equipment, preparing for what appeared to be a patrol. "You're leaving?" she asked, sitting up. "Supply run," he corrected. "Daily routine. You can stay until I return if you're not ready to travel." Alara stretched, assessing her body's recovery. The heaviness had largely dissipated, though a dull headache lingered behind her eyes. "I should get back to my people," she said, reaching for her pack to verify the stabilizer was still safely inside. "They'll be worried." Kale watched her check the device, his expression giving nothing away. "Your choice. The eastern corridors are relatively clear this time of day. Avoid the financial district. New growth patterns emerged there last week, more aggressive than previous strains." The practical advice, freely given, surprised her. "Thank you," she said, genuinely grateful for both the information and his unexpected hospitality. He shrugged, shouldering his own pack. "It's just data. No sense in you dying from ignorance when surviving that vine attack took effort." As they prepared to part ways at the entrance to a shelter, an unexpected explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Both froze, eyes meeting in a moment of shared alarm. "What was that?" Alara whispered. Kale's face hardened. "Structural collapse, most likely. The city's infrastructure continues to degrade, especially where the deep-root varieties have compromised foundations." He hesitated, then added, "It could block your eastern route." Another rumble, closer this time, made the decision for them. "We need to check," Kale stated flatly. "If your path is blocked, you'll need to know about alternative routes." They emerged cautiously into a world transformed overnight. New vine growth had appeared, responding to the structural damage by rapidly expanding to claim newly exposed surfaces. The collapsed building, once a 30-story office tower, now formed a massive barrier across what had been Alara's intended path home. "This changes everything," Kale observed, studying the new landscape with experienced eyes. "The collapse has disrupted established growth patterns. New territorial expansions will follow. This entire sector will be highly unstable for at least a week." Alara felt her heart sink as she realized the implications. "I need to get back. They're waiting for this stabilizer." Kale considered the situation, his tactical mind visibly processing options. "There's an alternative route," he said finally. "Through the old research district and across the university grounds. Longer, but potentially navigable." "You know the way?" Alara asked, hope kindling. Parts of it, he admitted. Mapped some sections during previous expeditions, but haven't traversed the entire corridor. He paused, seeming to debate internally, then continued, "I could guide you partway, at least to the Botanical Research Center. From there, you should have relatively clear passage eastward." Alara studied him, surprised by the offer. "Why would you do that?" Kale's expression remained impassive. "The route takes me near a technology center I've been meaning to explore. Potential components for my communications array. Efficient use of resources to combine objectives." It was a logical explanation, but Alara sensed there might be more to his decision. Regardless, she wasn't in a position to refuse assistance through unknown territory. "Okay," she agreed, adjusting her pack straps. "We travel together until the Botanical Center, then part ways." Kale nodded once, decisively. "We move quietly, efficiently. Stay within visual range, but maintain separation of at least 3 meters to avoid presenting a unified target to predatory species. Conserve water and energy." "Questions?" The military precision of his instructions confirmed her earlier suspicions about his background, but Alara merely shook her head. Lead on. Their journey began in tense silence, moving through the transformed cityscape with cautious efficiency. Kale set a pace that respected her still-recovering condition while maintaining necessary progress. He communicated primarily through hand signals, speaking only when absolutely necessary, his vigilance never wavering. By midday, they had navigated through the commercial district and approached the first major obstacle, a highway overpass that had partially collapsed, creating a precarious terrain of crumbled concrete and exposed rebar, all heavily colonized by a carpet-like variant of the green spread that reacted to pressure by releasing acidic spores. We go under, Kale determined after a brief assessment. Through the maintenance tunnels. Tighter quarters, but fewer active species. The tunnels were claustrophobic and dark, requiring headlamps that they used sparingly to avoid attracting light-sensitive predators. Water had seeped in, creating knee-deep pools in some sections that they waded through cautiously, aware that some aquatic mutations could strip flesh from bone in seconds. Where did you learn all this? Alara asked during a brief rest, gesturing to how he tested the water with specialized paper strips before proceeding. About surviving the spread? Kale was silent, so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and devoid of emotion. I was part of the initial containment team, Military Scientific Division. We were deployed when the first mutations appeared, before the general public knew how bad it was getting. Alara stared at him, processing this revelation. You knew? Before it all collapsed? The government knew this was coming. We knew something was happening, he corrected. Not the full extent. Not how quickly it would evolve or adapt. We thought we could contain it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. We were wrong. The admission seemed to cost him something, and Alara sensed a deeper story behind his clipped response. Before she could ask more, however, a distant sound, something between a screech and a gurgle, echoed through the tunnel, putting them both on immediate alert. Move, Kale commanded, all personal disclosure forgotten. Now, they pushed forward with renewed urgency, emerging from the tunnels into the late afternoon sunlight to find themselves in what had once been a university campus. The academic buildings stood in varying states of decay, some completely collapsed, others eerily intact, but wrapped in vines that pulsed with bioluminescent rhythms. We'll need shelter for the night, Kale announced, studying the darkening sky. The physics building ahead has a basement level with reinforced walls originally designed for radiation experiments. Potentially defensible. They approached cautiously, Kale leading the way with practiced movements that spoke of years of tactical training. The building's main entrance was completely blocked by growth, but a side emergency exit yielded to Kale's specialized cutting tools, allowing them access to a stairwell relatively free of vegetation. The basement level was surprisingly intact, with heavy doors that could be secured against outside threats. Years of scientific equipment lay abandoned, covered in dust, but otherwise untouched by the chaos that had consumed the world above. This will do, Kale decided, systematically checking the space for threats or entry points. Finding none, he began the practiced routine of establishing a temporary base, setting up perimeter alarms made from scavenged materials, designating sleeping areas, and preparing a small heating element for food. Alara watched him work, impressed despite herself by his methodical approach to survival. You've done this many times before, she observed. Too many, he agreed without looking up from his task. As night fell in the world above, they shared a sparse meal of preserved rations from Kale's pack, supplemented with purified water. The basement's silence was profound, broken only by the occasional distant sound of movement from the floors above, creaking vines expanding into new territory or disturbing the building's weakened structure. Tell me about your people, Kale said unexpectedly, breaking the extended silence. When Alara looked surprised at his interest, he added pragmatically, if something happens to you, I should know where to deliver the stabilizer. The statement was practical, unemotional, but represented a significant shift in their tentative relationship. It acknowledged both the dangers they faced and his commitment to her mission, should she fail to complete herself. Alara considered how much to reveal, then decided that limited trust was necessary under the circumstances. We're a small group, 12 survivors, including 3 children. We've established a sanctuary in an old water treatment facility east of here. Concrete walls, secure access points, underground sections that the spread can't easily penetrate. The sick child, Kale prompted. Mira, she's 9. Smart brave. Alara's voice softened. She ventured too close to a new variant we hadn't cataloged yet. By the time we realized what had happened, the spores had already entered her system. We've been managing the symptoms, but without the stabilizer. She trailed off, the implications clear. Kale nodded once, absorbing the information. Water treatment facility is a good choice. Self-contained systems, potential for sustainable water and power. Defensible. He paused and asked, "How have you survived this long?" Carefully, Alara replied with a hint of dark humor. We scavenge, we adapt, we learn the patterns of the spread. Each of us has skills from before. We have a former botanist who helps identify which mutations are dangerous in which ways. A mechanic who keeps our systems running. My background in urban exploration helps with finding safe passages. You work together, Kale observed, something unidentifiable flickering in his eyes. It's the only way to survive long-term, Alara stated. Isn't it lonely, being on your own? Kale's expression closed off immediately. Lonely is safer than betrayed, he said flatly, rising to check the perimeter alarms before she could respond. The conversation lapsed into silence. Alara wondered about the story behind his words. What experiences had taught him such thorough distrust of human connection? As she settled onto the makeshift sleeping mat he'd arranged, she found herself studying his profile as he maintained watch. The harsh angles of his face softened slightly by the dim emergency lighting. I could take a watch shift, she offered. You need rest too. 4 hours, he conceded after a moment's consideration. Then I'll wake you. True to his word, Kale roused her exactly 4 hours later, his hand covering her mouth momentarily to prevent any startled exclamation. Alara nodded her understanding, and he removed his hand, moving to the sleeping mat she had vacated. Any movement? She whispered. Minor activity on the upper floors. Nothing approaching our position. He lay down, adding, Wake me immediately if anything changes. Alara took up position near the door, her knife ready and senses alert. The responsibility of standing guard over another person felt strange after months of looking out primarily for herself. Watching Kale sleep, his body still maintaining a state of readiness even in rest, she wondered again about the man behind the hardened exterior. The night passed without incident, and they prepared to continue their journey as soon as enough light filtered down to make travel safer. Kale seemed more withdrawn than the previous day, responding to her attempts at conversation with monosyllabic answers or silence. Their path took them through the remains of the university's science complex, buildings that had once housed groundbreaking research, now serving as elaborate trellises for the very organisms that had escaped from similarly sophisticated laboratories. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The Botanical Research Center should be just beyond the next quadrangle, Kale informed her as they carefully picked their way through a courtyard where the cobblestones had been heaved upward by massive root systems. Once there, your eastern path should be clear enough to... He stopped abruptly, raising a hand for silence. Alara froze, straining her ears to detect whatever had alerted him. At first, she heard nothing over the constant background sounds of creaking vegetation and settling structures. Then she caught it, a rhythmic thumping, too regular to be natural. Movement, Kale whispered, pulling her behind the shelter of a fallen statue. Large specimen. They peered cautiously around their cover, and Alara had to stifle a gasp. Moving through the courtyard was the largest mutation she had ever encountered, a massive, bulbous creature that seemed part fungus, part animal. It moved on multiple thick, vine-like appendages that struck the ground with the thumping sound they'd heard, each impact leaving smoldering depressions in the stone. Apex predator, Kale breathed, barely audible. Territorial. Hunts by sensing vibrations and body heat. As if in response to his words, the creature paused, its shapeless mass pulsating as sensory organs Ilera couldn't identify seemed to scan the environment. A sickly sweet odor wafted toward them, making her eyes water and throat constrict. "Don't move," Kale ordered softly. "It's releasing pheromones to trigger prey movement. Hold your position regardless of discomfort." The next minutes stretched into an eternity as they remained perfectly still, fighting the increasingly powerful urge to cough or gag as the creature's chemical assault intensified. Alera's lungs burned, her eyes streamed tears, but she maintained her position, taking the shallowest breaths possible through the fabric of her sleeve. Eventually, apparently detecting no suitable prey, the massive entity continued its lumbering progress across the courtyard, disappearing into the skeletal remains of what had once been the university library. "That was too close," Ilera whispered when Kale finally signaled it was safe to speak. "It's not supposed to be in this sector," he replied, concern evident in his voice. They typically establish territories near water sources with high organic content. Something's changed their patterns. "The building collapsed yesterday," Ilera suggested. "Possibly. Or a new mutation allowing adaptation to drier environments." He frowned, recalculating their route. "We need to be more cautious. If apex predators are migrating to new territories, established safe passages may no longer apply." They proceeded with heightened vigilance, taking a more circuitous route that added time but potentially avoided further encounters with larger predatory species. By midday, they approached a glass-domed structure that had once been the university's botanical garden and research facility. "This is where we part ways," Kale stated, pointing toward a path that led eastward from the complex. "That corridor should take you to the old aqueduct system. Follow it until you reach the industrial zone, then head southeast. If your water treatment facility is where I think it is, you should reach it before nightfall." Ilera nodded, memorizing the directions. The moment of separation felt unexpectedly significant after their brief but intense shared journey. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "For everything." Kale acknowledged her gratitude with a nod. "The stabilizer," he said. "Will it save the child? If I get back in time, yes. It should halt the cellular degradation long enough for her immune system to adapt." He seemed satisfied with her answer. "Good." After a brief hesitation, he added, "Your community approach to survival. It has merit, more sustainable long-term than solitary existence." Coming from him, it was a significant concession. "You could see for yourself," Ilera offered impulsively. "Come with me. Meet my people. Maybe we could help with your communications array." Something flickered in Kale's eyes, longing, perhaps, quickly suppressed. "No," he said firmly. "I have a mission to complete." And after that, Ilera pressed, surprised by her own reluctance to simply walk away from this strange, solitary man who had saved her life. "One objective at a time," he replied evasively. They stood in awkward silence, neither quite ready to say a final goodbye. Finally, Kale reached into his pack and withdrew a small device. "Take this," he said, holding out what appeared to be a modified radiation detector. "It can sense the pheromone signatures of the apex predators within a 100-meter radius. Not foolproof, but better than nothing." Ilera accepted the gift with surprise. "But don't you need it?" "I have another," he claimed, though something in his expression made her doubt the statement. "Consider it. Insurance on delivering that stabilizer safely." "Thank you," she said again, carefully stowing the device in her pack. Kale checked his weapons one final